That was the most. Okay, I'm. Since the JV sports on all my. Oh my God, that's how it was. And they did sports. Smile.
One day. No, I don't spend all weekend thinking about this moment.
I know. Roger, you don't have time. I thought about it. I thought you were here because you weren't sitting down there. But you weren't sitting there. We'll bring you one. You were sitting there another day. Not today. I could run.
They done got me so big one. I'm winning it bigger today. I'm winning.
Good morning.
I know the secret.
You pull one out from the bottom?
Yes, I can.
Realize that would have done better if one of our teammates did inside the six.
Yeah, it's okay. And I was having, I'm like sick on Monday.
All right, you got several things on your desk. I'll explain. Let them do what they do, and we'll get rolling.
I don't like the Dorito tacos. They nasty. That makes my stomach.
Good morning. Red Raiders, would everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence?
Pick a flag, any flag. I'm going with that one today.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for a moment of silence. Just a couple of announcements. The ring ball is going to be held Tuesday, October the 4th. Juniors, you are planning to attend. You can submit 4 photos in your Google Classroom. The deadline is this Friday. Also, the yearbook deadline for seniors to turn in their baby pictures and their quote is October 21st. Everyone have a great day.
Ukrainians are on the rise, that's for sure. All right, Monday. So you got several things on your desk. What we're going to be writing on today is the Age of Reconstruction notes. What you have that looks probably pretty standard at this point is the Unit 2B Study Guide Scavenger Hunt, and that'll be due on Wednesday as you walk into the exam. And what you're seeing for the second time is the half sheet. It is week 1, VFL. This week, when win and loss records count, quiz scores count. Last week, week 0 preseason, that was all figuring it out. Now we know what a week looks like. You got the words right in front of you. You can see they are some words from last week that draw into some words from this week. So I've always said it'll be vocab for 2 weeks worth. And there you have it. They are the right words this time. They're the entire right words, and I won't curveball you by any means on that one. So thank you, guinea pigs, for helping me figure things out along the way. And then, hey, Friday, attendance, it matters, right? You matter to your team. So I hope the teams are rallying together. And we're doing practice and warm-ups and scrimmages and all the sports lingo along the way so that on game day you can have a good go at it. And I think we're gonna have some fun. I printed off your logos, and I am gonna work on a board outside the in the hall here, so everyone will see what we're doing with VFL, and you can debate about whose logo is the coolest and all that kind of stuff. And on your half sheet, there's the schedule. So actually, I do have one more page I'll give you at the end of the block here. But you got your schedule, so you can start talking smack to the team that you're going to be against this week. One team, given that there's an odd number in here, one team will always have a bye for the week. That doesn't mean you won't take the quiz. You will take the quiz. You just have a bye for wins and losses. And we'll work out, wins and losses, total record, who's the seeding going into the playoffs. We'll work that out come week 7. Best thing you can do is win each week. Just win each week and, fight for that top seed. And you might find yourself walking towards the trophy at the end as well. That trophy ain't going to win itself, Landon. Ain't going to win itself. All right. Everybody look at my meme and laugh. The Doritos Locos Taco, which at this point I believe is like 13 years old, has lasted like 4 times as long as the entire Confederate States of America. Significant portion of our history. Of course, we have to talk about it. But I think a lot of people give way too much credit to the rebelling South, as they literally lasted only 4 years. And weird things like the Doritos Locos Taco have long outlived even the Confederate States of America. So everybody pull out your study guide, the study guide itself. So 1, I want to make sure everybody's got it. And 2, what I'm going to ask you to do is walk me through how we've gotten here so far. Walk me to the point that we are at today. So everything from the road to the Civil War all the way to, well, we're ready to start the era of Reconstruction. Just remind me. Take me on a journey and remind me how we got to where we are. I have mine. It's this one. Pull out this one. Not the scavenger hunt that's already in front of you, but the actual study guide. There you go. Yes, you do. This study guide. I got this one several days. I gave it to you last week, so you've already had it. It does have, so it's got the circle soldiers. On the back, it's got lines. I think it's 4 pages long. Yeah, you've already got this. Pull something out and start trying to look at it. The study guide, right? The one where I say highlight what you know, go through it several times. If you have something unhighlighted, you need to return to that. Study guide. We're doing 2 things here. 1, making sure you have it. Have very few extras. Okay, this is something that when it's 5 pages long, I don't put a whole ton of extras. We have very few extras. When I give you one, it's your item for keeps. But I am making sure everyone has one. Jackie, is that a hand? Now there are absences and whatnot, and that's precisely what I'm doing here. I'm trying to make sure everybody has a chance to have one. All right, you got it? See, Bryce, you did have it. You did have it. So now this is conversational. Walk me through the story. Just as I've told you the story, walk me up to the point where we're at today, the era of Reconstruction, starting with the road to war. So arguably, it's already in order for you. Tell me a couple of things that turned up the heat on that frog that we boiled. Please. Slavery, the big one. What are a couple of individual things that relate to slavery, each of them turning up the heat a little bit more? Dred Scott. What did Dred Scott? That's a big one, okay? Foundational Supreme Court case, probably the most wrong that they've ever gotten it. People want to debate about how long should a statute last, or hey, should that Supreme Court decision last into today? They got it wrong with Dred Scott. What happened with the Dred Scott case?
The Dred Scott case, he was born a slave, but he would travel to free states with his owner. So he considered himself free for living in a free state. He took them. They went to Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that slaves were property and that they could not be free if they were born on the state.
Excellent summary. And England, you definitely understand it, and I hope you all arrive at being able to summarize it in your own words like that. Got a big picture of Dred Scott here. I give him a couple bullet points. It must be important. It's on the study guide. Great summary of the Dred Scott case. Slaves are property, not people. Wow. If you want to use P, property and people, or you could say slaves are property, not citizens. They do not count in terms of the Constitution and all the constitutional rights that we've ever discussed. So slaves are property, not citizens. That sucks. That's the Dred Scott case. Turns out to heat on slavery a little bit more. What about the word compromise just over and over and over? I get it. They're probably hard to keep straight into your brain. But these various compromises we've arrived at so far, what are they designed to do as it relates to slavery?
Bring slaves back.
I heard it from several at the same time. That is the key word. And if you need to remember me doing the teapot up here, whatever, balance. All of these compromises, whether 1820 or 1850, Henry Clay involved, it seeks to balance. There's some specifics, okay, and I know that, memorizing each state involved might get a little convoluted, but the purpose of each of these compromises is to try to balance slave and free states. We draw lines, then we expand west, we get more territory. Oh, that line doesn't work anymore. What are we going to do now? How do we help those in the north who want to abolish slavery? How do we satisfy them? Those in the south who have slavery as a part of their economy, how do we satisfy them? Good life advice for you is reaching to the middle and compromising. Now, slavery, compromise is bad, but in life, sometimes you have to compromise. So these compromises, don't let them get convoluted in your brain. It's about balance, and I heard that from several of you along the way. All right, what about that militant abolitionist? I think we know the word abolitionist pretty well. Who's that militant abolitionist? He wasn't praying, he was fighting. John Brown. And some would say that his actions were the first shots fired in the Civil War. Now, not declared Civil War, but his action and his reign really leads us to the fighting. What exactly did he do?
He killed white slave owners.
The white slave owners, first in Kansas, but more notably,
Let it rain on Harper's
Ferry, Virginia. Okay, he gets into the arsenal. He can't get out of the arsenal. He's surrounded by none other than Robert E. Lee of the United States Army. And of course, we talked about him as a breakaway rebel leader of the Confederate Army. But John Brown, so he's captured, he's tried. Arguably, the trial gives him a chance to get his message out. The trial was probably the best thing for him. Even though he was really kind of resigned to his fate, he was aware that once in custody, he was probably never going to leave custody, and he didn't. But the trial gave him a chance to speak, and that's arguably the best thing that was for his case. That was the best thing he could have hoped for because he got to get his message out. John Brown, the raid, he's hanged. He becomes a martyr. Some say that the gallows were like the cross, giving him that Jesus-like status, but he becomes a martyr for those who believe in abolishing slavery. And the stage is set for war. All right, we walked ourselves to the war. I'm also helping you walk through the study guide a little bit. Tell me about some of the battles we fought. What were a couple of the key battles? There's strengths and weaknesses. Those are important. I'm not going to elaborate on that right now. Tell me about some of the key battles that got fought in the Civil War. Where were the first shots fired? Fort Sumter. A bombardment. Okay, not a land battle, but a bombardment. And who wins the thing? The Confederates, because they are bombarding the entrapped Union. This is when the war is on. Okay, no turning back. Shots have been fired from the rebels on the Federals. Game on. Let's go. Both sides raise an army, and where do we meet for a first land battle? Just outside of Richmond. Okay, the purpose of the battle is protecting Richmond. The battle is, that's with the bull, you get the horns. Yeah, the Battle of Bull Run. What did a lot of people really believe about this battle?
Be a sweeping Union victory.
On paper, the Union should win, okay? And then also, they believe that this battle, how many more battles would we have to fight? The idea was that this would be one big battle to determine the war. The Union should win, at least on paper. We talked about, sometimes sports teams walk into a game and clearly there's a dominant team, but why do you play the game? Because anything could happen. The Confederates win. The Confederates show that they have greater military tacticians, stronger generals overall. Jackson earned his nickname, standing like a stone wall. So clearly, this is not going to be one battle to end it all. We got a war on our hands. And because of that, of course, we got several more battles to talk about. What was the bloodiest day in U.S. history? Battle of Antietam. And we actually just crossed that anniversary. It was September 17th, which was Saturday, so I didn't have a chance to say it in class, but Saturday was September 17th, the 160th anniversary of the bloodiest day in U.S. history, Battle of Antietam. There's a lot of the militarisms that go into that. We're not tacticians in the room. We just need to know that from Antietam comes what? Not a fighting thing, but a writing thing. From Antietam comes? Say it louder for the people in the back. Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln uses the military victory to issue a political statement emancipating slaves where? The South rebelling states is the best way to put that. Yeah, we like to think of Lincoln as the great emancipator, and he gets there. But this was a political move, a military move to gut the Southern economy, the Southern labor force. So good. Antietam, bloody, tied to the Emancipation Proclamation, was a real turning point in the war. Battle of Gettysburg. Robert E. Lee tries to venture north, tries to distract the Northerners by invading their own territory, putting their capital at risk. How'd it work out for him? Not well. How many people does he lose? About a third of his army. Okay, that statistic is not super significant for memorization, but you got to understand Robert E. Lee gets schwacked, if I can use some slang, and loses a large portion of his army. And from the high water mark of the Confederacy, it's all downhill from here. Gettysburg Union victory. Simultaneously, at the same time, and they probably don't even know about each other, what is happening out west? There's another city that's key to victory. Vicksburg. Yes, Vicksburg is a city on the what? Mississippi River, and whoever controls it controls what? Same thing. Yeah, the river itself. The river is good for what? Trade, economy, splitting the Confederacy in half, north and south running river. Okay, Vicksburg. Lincoln himself calls it the key. I had you draw what? Key. Okay, that is important. As you work through any test question, any synonym for key to control the Mississippi River, boom, you got to link it to Vicksburg. Vicksburg, Mississippi, always going to be linked. Let's now get to how we really destroy morale in the South. Who destroys morale and how? Right here in this stage, on your shirt. Sherman of the Union Army. Your Sherman's marchers, you should be all over that. Ray, why did I reference your shirt? Battle of Atlanta. The siege of Atlanta, for starters. Atlanta was good for what to the South? Yeah, an industry, commerce, railroad hub. Take Atlanta, you take what little commerce or transportation and industry they have in the first place. If you take Atlanta, they have almost nothing left after that. So he sieges and burns Atlanta, and that's not enough. But wait, there's more. What's he do next? March to the sea. Atlanta to Savannah. About how far? 250 miles. That statistic isn't super important. What's he do to everything in between? Burns it to the ground. Crops, livestock, homes, anything that could bring a military advantage to the South, he burns, destroys, damages beyond, destroys.
Rips up railroad ties.
Railroads are huge. Yep, rips up railroad ties, makes Sherman's neckties. What does he do to people along the route? Yeah, the focus is not killing. Okay, a lot of, Sherman marched to the sea. It wasn't mass murder. It wasn't even military engagements. Okay, they weren't in battle, but they were taking resources away from the South. So Sherman was burning and destroying resources, not people. Now, that's not to say nobody died, but it was not focused on there's not mass civilian casualties. That's important to know. And then finally, where do we wave the white flag? By we, I mean them. Appomattox Courthouse. Appomattox Courthouse, you drew a white flag. Okay, now we struggled a little bit on some of the vocab, so that's why I am doing this review. Appomattox Courthouse, white flag, surrender. The losers, of course, are not the Doritos Locos Taco, but the Confederacy. So you got to know that that is where Robert E. Lee himself surrendered. That was a pretty good walkthrough. Now your study guide goes into personalities, and each of those personalities carry a couple of details that are important as well. But that pretty much gets us to where we are today, the era of Reconstruction. I referenced this picture last week, so I wanted to pull it up. On the right-hand side, that is Lieutenant George Armstrong Custer, and he maybe has the fastest promotion track in the history of the Army because he literally graduates from West Point at the beginning of the war, and he is a 2-star general by the end of the war. So certainly goes into, some of his flaws are his youth and immaturity, and we probably gave him too much rank too fast. And from that, he does a couple of, questionable and weird things. This is the whole package of Custer. But in this picture right here, as I referenced it last week, what did I say? Who's he sitting next to? Remember? This was a sliver of a detail. Sitting next to his old college roommate, who was captured at a particular battle. So Custer on the right is sitting next to his own classmate who was captured and wounded at the Battle of Williamsburg. Not a super significant battle, but the picture here demonstrates how families were split, how friends were split, and in this case, these gentlemen spent 4 years in the same room, college atmosphere. Okay, like I can imagine my roommate at West Point, and they end up on different sides because of their state loyalties, and this is just kind of a personification of the war and the splitting of the country. A couple of details here to just kind of round it out. We know that it was 4 years long. Hopefully your brain, anytime a question comes up about the Civil War, you're going to go straight to the 1860s, 1861 to 1865. We know who fought on each side. A couple of pictures here to visualize just how destructive the war was. So who was involved? 1 out of every 10 northern males died. Military age 20 to 45, okay, so that adult age bracket, 10% of them died. 1 out of every 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There'd be 1 in this room, really about 1.5 in this room, people who died because of the war. I'm not pointing at anyone, I'm just giving you a statistic. Southern, same age bracket, actually a slightly different age bracket, 30%. So times 3 as deadly, and you can see how hardly anyone was unaffected by the war, right? If 3 out of every 10 people are dead, that's not even counting injured. You can't look left or right and see a family that's unaffected by the war. This battle here, this picture here, a little bit grainy because of how I saved it from the internet, but I think what you can see is the casualties by location. The bigger the circle, the more people died in a particular battle. Now, there's a lot of pockmarks where there were less than 250 deaths in a particular battle, but of course you can see the big ones. You can tell where Gettysburg is. You can tell where the sieges were, like Vicksburg. You can see where most of the fighting happened, right on the edge of the rebelling states in the north. Virginia, for sure. Kentucky, out west, a lot of small battles give us a lot of pockmarks there. Pretty interesting visualization to see where the death and the dying actually happened. In total, 620,000 Americans, I say Americans for both sides, died in the war. 620,000. If you want to combine all other U.S. wars, which is 11 counted declared wars and police actions, 648,000. So the Civil War nearly matches all other U.S. military deaths across 260 years. Clearly, the most significant military event in U.S. history, and leads us to what we're going to talk about today, the era of Reconstruction. Reconstructed.
I thought we were playing Jenga.
Reconstructed.
What?
Oh, what do you do that?
Reconstruct. Reconstruct.
Deconstruction.
Here's just great.
Okay. Like, I will
Faster, faster, faster. What is taking you so long?
Ah,
Some of you are just not interested in being involved. Okay. See you. Pretty quiet overall. I wonder if there's a leader amongst you.
Hurry up, y'all. Bring it up. I can't tell.
Got a drummer over there. Is that the right way to do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how
not
you
really,
do it.
but I mean, it can't be back to normal. You destroyed it.
Yeah. If you mess it up.
Be careful about what we mess up in life, huh?
Mm-hmm.
You messed it up.
You have right feelings,
Gracie
right?
says, I'm out. Maria says, I'm out, but I'm still
Let's
standing
play.
here.
Let's play. You go first, Christina.
All
Oh, Jackie, let's go first.
right, come and take a seat. Shocked you, didn't I? Oh, now we're just playing Jenga. Okay, I get it. All right, go back and play. Well, if we have time to the end of the hour, we can actually play true Jenga. Leave it. It's fun. Fatima,
Yeah.
did we talk about this class before you walked in today?
Did we talk?
Did you and I talk? We did not. Fatima, what is the statement you made up here?
Oh, it couldn't go back to the way it was.
Because
Destroyed.
it can't go back to normal because you destroyed it. My class on Reconstruction complete. Fatima, thank you. You can't go back to normal because you destroyed it. She's exactly right. Now, I was hoping to have maybe it's a suitable analogy, right? In reconstructing it, it still falls back over. Questions for you to make sure it all made sense. How many of you were leading the direction? How many of you were leading the reconstruction here? We're a quieter bunch. I know it's first block. Couple Jackson, were you leading a little bit? Did we follow Jackson unswervingly? Did we just follow Jackson because he stepped up? Did someone have an alternate opinion on how to reconstruct? Delaney, you should I did. What was your alternate opinion? Okay, did you express yourself?
No,
You just went with Jackson. You expressed yourself a little bit, but Jackson was a dominant leader here. Was there debate or disagreement? I kind of just asked that. Was there debate or disagreement? You guys were a quieter bunch. I've seen classes get pretty heated about how to do things before, so we can imagine that maybe in a small group project there is debate or disagreement about how to do something. How about this? Other than Fatima stealing the whole statement, how about this? What took longer, knocking it down or building it back up?
Nobody was open.
What took longer, knocking it down or building it back up?
Building it back up.
Yeah, I knocked it down in a fraction of a second, didn't I? Building it back up took incrementally longer than that. And Fatima, what statement did you just make again?
It couldn't go back to normal.
Well, yeah, but you also just said nobody was helping.
Nobody was open.
All right, so in about a minute and a half, really, this demonstration took less than 2 minutes. I saw you all behave according to basic human expectations, psychology. Some of you were all in. A leader rose to the top. Those of you that wanted to do it a different way, maybe you voiced your opinions, maybe you held back and were disgruntled. Fatima lands the big statement by saying it can't possibly go back together the way it was originally because you destroyed it. And we see that it's a lot easier to knock something down than to build it back up. So when we come back, we're going to take our Jenga tower analogy and start to understand the whole era of Reconstruction. So bathroom break, well done so far. When we come back, we're actually gonna go. Gotta answer. Also a good analogy. A while. By myself, took a while. That's right, Trinity, I like that. That's good extra thinking as well. Good thinkers in this room. I think Lincoln was very impressed by Reconstruction. Until Delaney and Fatima started playing real Jenga. He re-deconstructed it. Reconstructed it. No, they re-deconstructed it. Re-destroyed. Re-deconstructed it. Hey, Trinity said something pretty powerful on the way. She's right there.
Where's the lady? The lady.
Trinity said something pretty powerful on the way out the door. She said, how long did it take you to build it in the first place? So I'll expand my analogy one step further. We've already built a country. To knock it down to rebuild it. And you can think about the amount of time for each of those. Long time to build a country, short time to destroy it. In rebuilding it, one, it's going to take a long time, and two, Fatima, we're never going to get it back to original because it was destroyed. That is the theme for everywhere we're going. All right, there are three different plans for Reconstruction. Now we're going to talk presidential, radical. We're going to hit Andrew Johnson, a couple of other vocab words along the way. You guys are getting pretty good at taking these notes. I think you know how to do it. I took notes in church just yesterday, and I know as I say to you guys frequently, do it like if you're in a sermon and you're taking notes for the pastor, like I do it too, okay? I know, I've learned to take good notes. I know I'm a hair older than you guys, but you guys are growing in how to summarize as you take good notes along the way. So, tell the story here. Three different plans for Reconstruction. There's Lincoln's plan. I'm going to tell you about it. Lincoln, unfortunately, got John Wilkes Booth, and he can't enact his plan. Lincoln was always going up against the congressional Republicans, or sometimes called the radical Republicans. So this is even before Lincoln was assassinated. He has some resistance to his plan for Reconstruction. But when he died, a lot of his plan and efforts and energies died with him. And we have an accidental president. His vice president, Andrew Johnson, becomes the president. And we're going to see how Johnson's plan differed from Lincoln's original plan. And we're going to see how Johnson had to battle the radical Republicans just like Lincoln was anyway. So let's look at Lincoln's plan. Lincoln wanted to welcome the South back, as he said in his second inaugural address, with malice towards none. Just come back to the Union. Okay, we don't even hold it against you. Are there going to be consequences? Not really. Just come back to the Union. His plan is called the 10% plan because it asks that 10%, or it's called for 10% of a state's voters pledging loyalty back to the Union in order for that state to be returned to the Union. So I don't know the numbers of every state population, but let's say there were 3 million people in Georgia at the time. It would only call for 300,000 out of 3 million to pledge their loyalty back to the United States. That is not a lot. That is a very small amount of the state pledging its loyalty back to the Union. So you may have the state re-enter the Union when 10% are for the reunion and 90% are still opposed to it. This was not strict enough. This was not firm enough. It was not enough consequences for many who were in Congress. But Lincoln's focus is, from the start, just let's reunite as a union. He wanted to keep the Union together. Of course, it breaks. And in Reconstruction, he wanted to bring the Union back together. A very lenient plan for Reconstruction. Well, we know John Wilkes Booth, or we know that Lincoln gets shot, conversely. The radical Republicans were resisting Lincoln even while he was still alive. A lot of times, Lincoln dies on such a high note, surrender of Lee's army. 5 days later, Lincoln dies when things are going so well that the country rallies around him. The South condemns the murder. The North certainly condemns the murder, and they raise Lincoln up almost like a godlike figure. Secretary of War William Stanton says now he belongs to the ages. He has been reunited with George Washington in death. So Lincoln dies on a high note, and I think I said the phrase last week, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Lincoln never really had to get his hands dirty with Reconstruction. So the legacy he carries, and always will, is that he died on a high note. He died as the emancipator, and then Johnson is the one who really has to get kind of beat up. His legacy and his personal reputation is beat up as he fights through Reconstruction. But here's something Lincoln was dealing with even before he died, and it just gets a little bit overshadowed with how he died on a high note. A lot of these radical Republicans believe Lincoln is being too easy on the South. A lot of people in his own party, now radical implies that they're a little bit separated from mainstream. A lot of people in his own party wanted to punish the Southerners. They did this, they caused this, they harmed us. Again, think about how many people have a personal investment with death or injury. So likely a lot of these Republican legislators have people in their own family dead or injured. They want to punish the South. They also want to ensure in freeing the slaves, let's make sure that we don't just free them to the wolves. You are now free, good luck. They demanded a lot of civil rights and protections for the freedmen. And finally, how did the radical Republicans want to do this? They wanted to militarize the South. They wanted to make military districts with military governors. like the military governor of Alabama, the military governor of Mississippi, the military governor of Georgia, and all the southern states kind of separated into districts. And they wanted Union soldiers to occupy the South and really kind of run it as a militarized zone for, well, kind of indefinitely. There was never really a conversation about how long this would last. So you can see Lincoln just wanted to bring them back, okay, just come back to the family. Whereas the radicals wanted to make sure it hurt along the way. Come back and we're going to spank you when you get here as well. So this is something Lincoln is dealing with. Now, Lincoln is still alive. As I'm telling you the story here, Lincoln is still alive. There's this bill. This is not vocab necessarily, but you just got to understand it to get there. The Wade Davis bill said that 50% of voters must take the oath of allegiance. That is a drastically different number than Lincoln's 10%. So in negotiations, right, we talk compromise. I'm on this side, you're on that side. How do we meet in the middle? Well, if Lincoln was 10% and the radicals are 50%, will we negotiate to get to the middle? Unfortunately, John Wilkes Booth and his Derringer have something to say about that, or he steps into the conversation and he takes the negotiations away. Lincoln is killed, and unfortunately, we'll never really know how it would have shaken out, how Reconstruction would have worked under Lincoln's leadership. We can think that we know how he might have behaved, but we'll never know for sure because, of course, he dies and he's not there to lead it. Enter the accidental president, Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson, I briefly told you about him last week as we talked the epilogue of the story of Lincoln's assassination. He is the 17th president of the United States. Now, there's space for you to write some stats, and then there's space for you to answer some specific questions. So kind of do both of those. 17th president of the United States, he comes from Tennessee, which was a rebelled Confederate state. They were not a border state. They were flat out rebelled as a Confederate state. He is the only Tennessee legislator elected to the federal Congress who advocated for remaining in the Union. So he's called a Tennessee Unionist, a Southern Unionist. So in running for re-election, Lincoln adds him to the presidential ticket. He was not Lincoln's first vice president. Okay? He's only Lincoln's vice president for a very short amount of time from the time of his second election. But Lincoln adds him to the ticket so that it can show, hey, like vote for me, Lincoln and Johnson, a Southern Unionist, we're all in this together. That's why Johnson was selected to be on Lincoln's ticket. I told you a little bit about him personally in that he was a little bit of a drunkard, not the hardest of working of men. You know, you think that a good leader wakes up early and starts his day and, I don't know, gets to the office before the boss, whatever. That wasn't Johnson. Johnson was a little bit on the sluggard or lazy side. And of course, that's not a great work ethic to bring to the presidency. This is Andrew Johnson. This is the man who instantly becomes president as John Wilkes Booth pulled his trigger. When Lincoln died, Johnson becomes president, called the accidental president because of that. So Andrew Johnson, there's his picture. He's an ugly looking man, if you ask me. Here's a couple steps in his presidency, what he does. Takes office after Lincoln's assassination. He issues his own plan for Reconstruction, which is pretty similar to Lincoln's on the lenient side. But as a Southerner, he also understands Southern landowning, Southern plantation economy, and he is way on the side of not punishing the South. Way on the side of not having any consequences to those who rebelled, defected, fought against the North. He says, hey, like just rejoin the Union and, okay, we're going to have to abolish slavery. That is going to be a part of Reconstruction is abolishing slavery. But other than that, like there's no protections for the freed slaves. There's no consequences for the rebelled states. So on the scale of leniency, he is extremely lenient in his Reconstruction plan. And that puts him very much at odds with the radical Republicans. If they were fighting Lincoln and his lenient plan, they are certainly going to be all out, well, war would be a good word, all out war against Johnson for his extremely lenient plan. This is setting the stage for what will become impeachment. And you see that final statement there. He was impeached for fighting with the radical Republicans who thought he was too lenient. I am going to give you some specifics on the impeachment here in just a second as well. Johnson's plan becomes called presidential reconstruction. Lincoln's plan, which was loose and never fully written down, never put towards Congress, Lincoln's plan was called the 10% plan, and that's not vocab, okay? Presidential reconstruction is what we need to understand. So former Confederates above a certain rank were temporarily disenfranchised, but they could apply for a pardon. There would be no treason trials. No one would go to jail. No one would hang over their rebelling against the United States. This is Johnson's presidential reconstruction. And I see some of you kind of already arrived there. Very, very lenient. Circle it as very, very lenient. And I'll take the word off the screen so you can write for a second here. You can summarize by saying Confederates were we're not going to be imprisoned. We're not going to be hanged. You could apply for a pardon. No treason trials. Overall, very, very lenient. Johnson's presidential reconstruction. All right, got two screens coming up here, and there will be a couple more data points about each of them, okay? So as you write and as you save your space, here we go. Presidential reconstruction. So you don't need to write every word on the screen. Catch the gist of it, write the summary here. Presidential reconstruction focused on reintegrating former rebellion states into the Union. Just come back to us, okay? Rebelled, we want you to come back. Lincoln, Johnson, that sentiment is pretty the same. Just come back to the Union. Lincoln wanted to forgive and forget. This could be a phrase. Your parents ever say that to you? Maybe you have a fight with a friend. Maybe you're spatting with your siblings. Like, hey, forgive, forget, move on. That's kind of what Lincoln wanted to do. He wanted to allow the nation to heal. Lincoln called for 10% of a state to take that allegiance oath and rejoin the Union. Johnson maintains that as a number, 10%. Very importantly, do write this down. They must ratify the 13th Amendment. And I am going to talk through 3 amendments here in just a second, but the 13th Amendment is what's going to officially abolish slavery. So pretty foundational to the war we just fought. If you're going to rejoin the Union, you are going to do it as having ratified and formally accepted the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. And then, of course, you got to undo your secession. I mean, that is a part of returning to the Union, undo secession. I already showed you the word, but boom, lenient, and I'll give you a second to jot some of that down. Very, very lenient presidential reconstruction. In a second, I'm going to contrast that with the radical reconstruction, and seeing that y'all are taking very good notes. If you need more paper of any sort, I can offer you paper. You can grab paper of any sort. Students taking more notes than less. Presidential reconstruction. The big take, states come back together and it's lenient. Radical reconstruction. Now, something about radical reconstruction is that hold off on this slide. Don't write on this slide. I'm going to show you the next slide. It's a little more summarized. A lot about radical reconstruction is, or something unique about radical reconstruction, I think, is that today, a lot of what they're proposing, we would consider to be basic human rights. The protections that they're going to offer to recently freed slaves, and I'm going to change my language here and not refer to them as slaves anymore, I'm going to say freedmen. They are former slaves, recently freed, and from henceforth, I'm going to refer to African Americans as freedmen. In this era, they are freedmen. And then into the future, of course, they're African Americans. I mean, they're people, right? So I'm not going to say the word slaves anymore. I'm going to say freedmen. Something about congressional or radical reconstruction is that what these radical Republicans are proposing is really just a lot of basic human rights that, as we talk about it, you're going to be like, of course that should have been included in Reconstruction. Why are they called radical? Well, it's because they were opposed to the presidential administration at the time. So one thing they wanted to do was put the southern states under military rule. I already told you that, divide them into districts. Southern states had to essentially rewrite their constitutions, not just accept the 13th Amendment, but rewrite their constitutions. Southerners who supported the Confederacy lost their right to vote temporarily. They had to go through a much more lengthy process of regaining their rights. Whereas Johnson said, hey, just swear an oath of allegiance and we're good. The radical Republicans wanted them to actually have some consequences related to their rebelling. So it took a lot longer. It was the plan would be that it would take a lot longer for them to regain their rights. And then radical Reconstruction demanded the ratification of 3 amendments. I don't know before. 3 amendments, 13, 14, and 15. And I'm going to spend a few seconds here explaining each of those, 13, 14, and 15, because they are pretty foundational to where we're going in Reconstruction. This is considered very strict Reconstruction. And then here's a little bit more of a summarized slide. So on radical Reconstruction, if you haven't written yet or you're looking for space to write, Ray has filled up his space already. Here's the fair summary. Focus on expansion of basic human rights, especially those to the recently freedmen, the recently freed former slaves. They did want to punish former Confederates, much more so than the presidential Reconstruction. Divided the South into 5 military districts, and then states had to ratify 13, 14, and 15. On the back of your page, we're going to elaborate on 13, 14, and 15, so no need to do that right here. A bit lengthier on the note-taking today, that's why I'm pausing along the way. Do you see the contrast? I've done a lot of talking, but I hope we can see presidential was just come back, ratify 1 amendment. Radical or congressional was punishment, basic human rights, which are a lot of it programs that the South is going to have to enforce. The military is involved, and you have to ratify 3 amendments. So this is the spectrum from lenient to strict. Many, many people will hypothesize what Lincoln would have done on this spectrum of strict to lenient to strict. And I think Lincoln would have been pretty much fairly in the middle. Fairly in the middle. I think Johnson did not carry his intentions out to a T or perfectly as Lincoln would have designed it. But I do think, and history does think that Johnson tried to follow Lincoln's attitude of leniency, but Johnson as a Southerner just took it even farther towards lenient. I don't think Lincoln would have shaded it quite as lenient as Johnson did. But in keeping with everything we've ever said about Lincoln, he really did want to preserve the Union and bring the Union back together. So the consequences to the South were considerably less under Lincoln than the radicals were proposing in Congress. I think I see pencils down. I'm going to move on. So strict. And that kind of punches me, gets me to the punchline there. Lincoln's 10% plan was the original proposal. Unfortunately, he dies. He can't enact all of his thoughts. Presidential Reconstruction led by Johnson is on the side of lenient, and he gets impeached over it. So I'm going to tell you that in a second. And the Congressional Reconstruction was very strict. And it was, in hindsight, in 2022, we can see that the goal of radical Reconstruction was to protect former slaves, to protect these recently freed men. So a lot of what they were proposing was not all that radical because it was about basic human rights. And at the time it was. All right, the impeachment and trial of Andrew Johnson. Boom, boom, boom. We put Andrew Jackson on trial super briefly, right, in our classroom. We said, was he responsible for the deaths of the 4,000 Cherokees? It's kind of a fun thought exercise. Well, Johnson really got put on trial, and it was in the congressional setting, okay, and it's called impeachment. And I'm going to tell you about it right now. So the radicals that Johnson, well, first of all, Lincoln was butting with the radicals, and then Johnson, the accidental president, butts heads with the radicals, and the radicals were angry that Johnson was shading on the lenient side, more or less upholding Lincoln's vision for Reconstruction. In butting heads with everybody, Johnson attempts to fire the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. Here's why that's a problem. Amidst all the butting heads, there's a piece of legislation passed, which is called the Tenure of Office Act. And on your page where it says, why was Johnson impeached? You got to write down the Tenure of Office Act. Johnson in choosing to fire Edwin Stanton, he's breaking the law. The Tenure of Office Act says this. Tenure means that once you've held a job long enough, you can't get fired for it. A lot of college professors get tenure. And after they've been, and I know it sounds like 10-year, that's not exactly what it means. It doesn't mean you have to have your job for 10 years. Tenure means you are invested in your job. The Board of Regents has said you are a professional and you can't get fired for no reason. Now, you can get fired for cause, but you can't get fired for no reason. Well, Johnson doesn't like his Secretary of War. This is Lincoln's Secretary of War. This is a man who was by Lincoln's side when he died. Edwin Stanton is the one who said now he belongs to the ages. So Edwin Stanton is kind of a long-time public servant, holdover from Lincoln. Disagrees with Johnson on a lot of things. Naturally, they're butting heads. So since Johnson is the man, Johnson is the president, he holds the power here, he chooses to fire Stanton. Why he can't do this is because Congress passes this law called the Tenure of Office Act. It says you cannot fire civil servants without the approval of Congress. Now, Jackson forced me to do some deep dives this weekend, and Jackson said, wait a second, doesn't the president sign things into law? Did Johnson sign that into law? Answer is no. Congress had a majority, or the Republicans had a supermajority in Congress, and Johnson vetoes the Tenure of Office Act. Congress overrides the veto, which is a classic example of what?
Checks and balances.
Checks and balances. So Johnson doesn't like this act, and he says, I'm going to prove to you that I'm in charge, and he fires Stanton, violating the law that you can't fire a federal official without congressional support. So technically, he absolutely breaks the law. And impeachment is a process for holding public officials accountable for high crimes and misdemeanors. He broke the law. He goes to an impeachment vote in the House of Representatives. Now, this is shading into a government class just a little bit here, but I got to do it to explain to you. The House of Representatives, and we did just experience this in our country a couple years ago with President Trump. The House of Representatives can hold an impeachment hearing, and they can vote on a simple majority to impeach the President of the United States. Impeachment is not the same as kicked out of office. It is not the same as fired. It is not the same as, quite frankly, anything changing at all. It is a statement on the House of Representatives sanctioning your actions. Ooh, bad man. You did something we don't like, and we vote to impeach you. Bring it in the present term. Pretty much what happened with President Trump. A Democrat-held House of Representatives voted on a simple majority to impeach a man for a reason. But guys, it doesn't have to have legal proof. It doesn't have to have. It's not the same as going to a court of law where you have to have 51% of the evidence has to point towards, or even other standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not like that. Unfortunately, sometimes it's entirely political, and whoever holds the majority kind of holds the power in an impeachment setting. Johnson is impeached by the House of Representatives. Well, now the process, I'm still telling you about government here. Now the process is that it goes to the Senate. Kind of foundational to our government is the separation of powers. House can't do what it wants by itself. It has to have the Senate as well. The Senate runs the trial. They run it like a court of law. What's kind of interesting about that is that sometimes they're not lawyers or judges in the Senate, right? The people that get elected to the Senate come from a lot of backgrounds. So the Senate running this trial, sometimes it might not be as effective as I hope for, because they're literally not legislators. They're legislators, not lawyers. Well, in the Senate, long story short, it's more than just 50%. I think it's 67%. I think it has to be a 2/3 vote to remove the man from office. Almost enough people voted to remove him from office. Comes down to one more senator to cast his vote, and this senator is a Republican. And if he stayed on the side of his party, he would have voted to remove Johnson. But he decides, and this is an example of moral courage and having a backbone and making sure you do the right thing for the country. He decides that it would not be in the best interest of the country to have the president removed. So he votes for not removing the president, and Johnson is saved by one vote. So he's impeached, but not removed. Now, of course, he doesn't have a lot of support in the country, and re-election is not on the horizon for him. but he is not going to be removed before the end of his term, and that's kind of significant overall. So that's the impeachment trial of Andrew Johnson, impeached but not removed. To bring it to the present day, President Richard Nixon, look at my wall here. Everybody turn and look. I got some sleepy eyes. Turn and look at the wall here. President Richard Nixon commits some crimes in office as well, high crimes and misdemeanors. He is likely to be impeached, so he resigns instead. The only president in our country to resign from office, he resigns instead of being impeached. And then not on the wall because our class technically stops in 2008, but President Trump was also impeached by the House of Representatives, twice actually, impeached but not removed as well. So that is the history of impeachment in our country. Johnson, Nixon resigns instead of being impeached. Trump is impeached twice. So not some ancient thing we're talking about. Oh, 160 years ago, how does that affect me? Something that comes to our class even still here.
Clinton's all impeached, wasn't
What's that? Excuse me. Absolutely, Jackson. Thank you for that. Clinton was impeached, and it's on the wall right there. Clinton was impeached. I knew my eyes were missing something there. Clinton is impeached for lying, which is called perjury, and we will talk about that as well. That's the history of impeachment in our country. I can't believe I forgot that one. I grew up with that one. All right, how are we doing here? I see some wobbly eyes. I mean, I kicked over a tower to get your attention. Now I got to plow through the conversation here. Okay, let's keep on keeping on. Let's talk about life during Reconstruction. I'm going to explain several things along the way here. So you have two vocabs at the bottom of your page, and quite frankly, the space for that vocab is more than it deserves. Should have given you more space for the Reconstruction methods. But carpetbagger and scalawag. Go ahead and just write these down verbatim. A carpetbagger is a northerner who moves to the South for the opportunity of making money. A lot of times they were Union soldiers. A lot of times, since the South was having to submit to the North and having to regain its admission to the Union, a lot of these Northerners went down there for a chance to make a buck. The reason they're called carpetbaggers is because they would take everything they owned on a carpet satchel. Luggage was made out of carpet, basically carpet at the time. Carpet satchel, head on south. So you got a lot of Northerners flocking to the South. Chance to make some money. Maybe that's selfish. On the other hand, a lot of carpetbaggers were those coming to help these recently freed. A lot of abolitionists came to teach school or to help them find jobs or to make sure that laws were being enforced. They also get tagged with this label carpetbagger. Carpetbagger is a generally negative term, but something, of course, if you're a Northerner going to teach school to recently freed slaves, I wouldn't say you're a bad person. Carpetbagger refers to a Northerner moving to the South, generally speaking, to make some money on the situation. Scalawag, on the other hand, is a Southerner who supported the Union and or worked with carpetbaggers. So if you're going to be disloyal to your own people, a lot of times, I think this term is usually used in the context of piracy. Oh, yeah, scalawag. Scalawag is a negative term as well, and it's a Southerner who supports the Union, supports the Reconstruction, or even works with the carpetbaggers as the carpetbaggers are seemingly exploiting Southerners. So two buzzwords there, and it kind of divides. It's one more thing that unfortunately divides us. Don't you think that the division is over? Aren't we coming back together? Well, look at our Jenga tower for the answer on that one. Reconstruction is hard. Carpetbaggers and scalawags are two type of people that are present in the South at this time. The Freedmen's Bureau. Freedmen's Bureau is something that's super important to Reconstruction, and it's not on your page there. That's fine. Just listen to it. Freedmen's Bureau was a law passed by Congress in 1865, or I should say, it was established by Congress in 1865. It ran programs designed to help these recently freed former slaves. Three main categories: schools, jobs, and housing. So they're running programs in the South, federally funded, so taxpayer funded, and it's helping these newly freed Americans, not slaves, not property, but Americans, citizens, get what they need, okay? Think about it. They just got released from an institution that fed them, clothed them, and housed them. Now, I'm not saying it was the best of situations, but they're released from a situation where they had basic needs met. If they did not get care upon release, the whole system could have collapsed. The whole release of slaves, the whole abolition of slavery could have imploded on itself. So the Freedmen's Bureau helps these people get what they need: school, jobs, and housing, food, clothing, shelter, medical. And another really cool thing is that they helped reunite families who were split by slavery. Do you remember in the episode of Timeless that the black soldier was trying to get a notice written for him? What was he asking for? He was not. What was he asking for?
He wanted to go back to the South.
Wanted to go back to the South, but he was asking Rufus to write what exactly? Anybody else? A letter. And in the letter, he said, "I'm looking for my wife. This is her name. I last saw her in the pen of a human trader in Birmingham, Alabama," or whatever it was, right? So a lot of these families that were split because of slavery, the Freedmen's Bureau did what they could to reconnect them. And, of course, there's not internet and credit cards and social security numbers and all the digital stuff we have today to track down a person. But the Freedmen's Bureau did what it could in the time period to reconnect families. And then finally, kind of fitting with jobs, it granted land to the newly freedmen as well. And that's important. These people have worked land their whole life, but it's never been theirs. So the Freedmen's Bureau is going to ensure that they get their own land and even some tools and livestock to help start running the land as well. So the Freedmen's Bureau is certainly one of the better programs that our nation has ever run. And while it was in existence, it did good things. Unfortunately, we're going to see it come to an end, and I'm going to put a punctuation mark on that at the end of our story here. Education, healthcare, job placement, you see that. This picture, which you've seen a couple of times now, as I set up the class, I think it popped up as one of the first slides. This is a representation of the Freedmen's Bureau. And the man you see in the middle is dressed as what? What can we infer from him by the way he's dressed? He's a soldier. Okay, so we see the blue, kind of gave that away, the blue Union jacket, and you see the epaulets of his soldier officer rank. And by his body posture now, he's separating two different groups. And what are those two groups, would you guess? Blacks and whites. Okay, so, and then the whites in particular, what do you think their background is? Okay, they want to attack their recently freed slaves. What do you think they might have been doing in the previous 4 years? A lot of Confederate veterans. A lot of Confederate veterans returning home from the war and finding that their plantations or their former way of life has been disbanded. Of course, rightfully so. But the Freedmen's Bureau is who steps between these two groups. It's the Freedmen's Bureau that represents keeping up the peace between these two groups. Now, I like the generic representation, but if you want to put a face to it, that man right there. President Ulysses S. Grant, who of course is the 18th president. After Johnson's fatal 4 years, Grant is elected as president. President Grant spends his years as president supporting the Freedmen's Bureau. He enforces a lot of acts that fight back against white supremacists, and we're about to talk about the KKK, Ku Klux Klan. President Grant fights for the freedom of black people, and then he legislates for the freedom of these newly freedmen as president. So he spends his life as a soldier and as a politician, seeking to enforce the rights of these recently freed black people. So President Grant deserves the reputation he has, both as a fighter and as a legislator, as an advocate for the oppressed person, for sure. So Ulysses S. Grant, man, could go on and on and on about him. He dies in a kind of a sad state in that he was bankrupt and he had made a poor financial decision in the later years of his life. But when he died, I read something this weekend, when he died, it's arguable that he was the most famous American in the world at that time. So I don't know who goes up there with that today. Trump, Obama on the political scale, Bill Gates, Tom Brady, a handful of famous Americans that we would say are known around the world. That was Ulysses S. Grant at the time of his death. So his death was a big deal. Elections. Something that happens in the Reconstructed South is that African Americans, one, can vote and two, can run for office. So the first time we have African Americans voted into office, and Hiram Rebel is not a name you need to understand, but I think it is worth noting. He's the first African American senator who steps into the halls of Congress representing the state of Mississippi. African Americans can vote, and they vote for people that look like them. So we finally have a batch of, 6 congressmen and then 1 senator are elected into Congress in, I think it's 1868, the first time that they really have a chance to vote for themselves. And then, okay, the Reconstruction Amendments, super important. It is the top of your back page. 13, 14, and 15. I want you to remember the words free, citizens, vote. Now, I want you to write this slide verbatim. It's super important. The 13th Amendment was a part of both Reconstruction plans, presidential and radical. The 13th Amendment was a given. States to rejoin the Union have to ratify the 13th Amendment, which officially makes slavery or forced servitude, is the language used, illegal all across the United States. The 13th Amendment is what overturns the Dred Scott decision, and it officially states that, excuse me, I'm going to take that one back. 13th Amendment grants freedom to all individuals in the United States. No servitude, no forced servitude or condition of bondage permitted throughout the United States anymore. 13th Amendment. 14th Amendment guarantees citizenship to all persons born in the United States. It is what overturns the Dred Scott case. If they're free, they're citizens. So no more property, no more people as property. 14th guarantees citizenship to all persons born in the United States. And the 15th, which has to be tacked on a little bit later because some of these southern states were like, fine, freedom, fine, citizenship, but we're still going to not let them vote. 15th Amendment guarantees the freedom for all men to vote. Still not women. So at this point, African-American men can vote and Caucasian women cannot. But the 15th Amendment, and we're walking towards women's rights, that next. 15th Amendment guarantees the right to vote.
Don't you have to don't they have to be able to read and things like that?
Getting there. Good question, Eric. Good question. So 13, 14, and 15. Now, I've taught this class a handful of times now. The best way for students to remember it is to think free citizens vote. I like to turn it into a citizen. If you're free, you are a citizen and you better vote. Free citizens vote. I got my voting sticker on the podium here. I voted in Macon County a handful of times in the 3 years I've been here. Free citizens vote. So you do not have to have the content of each amendment memorized. If a test gives you a lengthy excerpt and it mentions the word citizenship, it is talking about the 14th Amendment. If it mentions the right to vote, it's talking about the 15th Amendment. Free citizens vote. I like to call it the triplets. They always go together, 13, 14, 15, free citizens vote. So log that into your brain. Use that, the single word is if necessary, right? Now I wanted you to write the lengthier version, but now make sure you log into your brain, 13, 14, 15, free citizens vote. That will solve a lot of questions on exams. My benchmark exams, and then of course I don't know what's on the EOC, but man, if it rambles off some real lengthy language and it's referring to an amendment and you can grab the key word out of it, you don't have to ramble through the long language. You can understand it's talking about either 13, 14, or 15, free citizens vote. All right, can I say it any more plainly? Memorize free citizens vote. Cool, the triplets. All right, the Ku Klux Klan. Now, Eric mentioned, wait a second, I thought that there were still some restrictions to voting, and he's right, I'm gonna get there. Certain people groups in the South were highly resistant to what was being accomplished through Reconstruction, and one of these groups is the Ku Klux Klan, or the KKK, as it becomes known. The Ku Klux Klan began as a Confederate Veterans Club. Okay, today we have the American Legion, VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars, which I'm old enough to be a part of finally. I go to VFW meetings every now and then. This was initially, hey, let's just get together and talk about our war experiences, right? From an Army perspective, I can tell you old soldiers like to talk about what they did in the service. It starts as a Confederate Veterans Club. Quickly becomes a white supremacist group, a hate group, and since they're opposed to what's happening around them, they turn that hate into action and they begin to terrorize former slaves or these recently freedmen. The rights that these freedmen have under the Constitution are under assault by people like this who are going to try to prohibit them doing what the Constitution says they can do, like voting, for instance. Eric, and I will elaborate. I still got a couple more things to say on that specifically. These are Southerners who wanted to return to that pre-war Southern way of life. which is the phrase antebellum. Now, that is a Latin phrase. Did you know this was a language class? I feel like I teach you guys language more often than not. Ante means before, bella means war, antebellum, before the war. So today, how is that word used in country music today? Anybody? There's a band called Lady Antebellum. Catch that? You guys listen to the radio? Yeah, so well, you're right, there's the lady and there's a group. Good point. Lady A was always her name, and then when the group went from Lady Antebellum to Lady A, that lady started to like trademark and all that kind of stuff. Group called Lady Antebellum. They got a lot of good songs. I'm not sure I can name any off the top of my head right now. They got a lot of good songs that hit the radio. Well, amidst, we talked about this already, June of 2020, George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, the bringing down of Confederate monuments, amidst all of that, the name Lady Antebellum came under attack. And people are like, hey, what are you guys trying to say? You guys want to go back to this before the Civil War? You guys want to go back to that Southern way of life that includes plantation and slavery? The group Lady Antebellum, a country group, right, who sings twangy country songs, they're like, whoa, 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 absolutely not what we're trying to say by our name. I think we'll change our name. And they changed the name to Lady A, which actually led to a trademark issue because there's another singer named Lady A as well. So all of that to say that's the word antebellum, pre-war. This was the attitude of a lot of people who just wanted to go back to the way things were. Man, Lincoln and that tyrant up north and Reconstruction. I long for the old days, the days of antebellum, the days before the war. So that's a buzzword that's kind of important, and that's why I highlight it like that. Now, when we look at this group, the KKK, don't let them fool you into thinking that they are just Southerners longing for the way it used to be. They are a violent hate group. This is a depiction of what they would do to African Americans. This is a family of freed African Americans living their life the best way they know how with their new freedom. And the depiction of the man there with the white hood on is very common, very similar to what the KKK would do to these black families that they were terrorizing. The white hood is where we get the more dressed down version of a Klansman. Started off as a simple mask. Okay, started off as hiding their identity. And I would say if you're going to do anything which you feel needs to hide your identity, you probably need to rethink what you're doing in the first place. But the KKK, they're so proud of what they stand for that they got to hide their face whenever they're doing it. Pretty good representation here of, and there were other groups as well. KKK is the most famous. There's another one called the White League, and you can see what they're doing here. They are uniting under the oppression of these recently freed slaves. So could go all in on how terrible the KKK is. Obviously it is. And this is where the Freedmen's Bureau steps in to keep I don't know if peace is the right word, but at least to separate the two groups. Okay, so I'm showing you this picture again because the Freedmen's Bureau is who steps in to separate these Klansmen from the African Americans that they're trying to protect in the first place. Tracking? Questions? Round it out here, I promise. Unfortunately, the KKK does still exist to this day. This is from Connecticut in I think the 1960s, but I don't know if they still print paraphernalia. But the Klan is still alive and active in certain portions of the country. Quite frankly, even kind of neighboring counties here in Georgia as well still have active Klan representations. I'm not saying it's widely powerful or popular, but I am saying it still exists to this day, and that kind of stinks. Question?
Wasn't they having a big controversy about the KKK when the Killer Clowns came out?
The what?
Killer Clowns came out. Killer
Clowns. Who? I don't know. Are you talking about like people who would hide with a clown mask from a couple years ago? I'm not sure. Let's look that up together. I can't remember if there's a connection there. It could. I mean, covering up the face and the targeting of anyone. Fill in the blank. Yeah, it could be. I remember that. You bring that up. That's a bring back to what I remember when the clown thing was happening. All right, black codes. This is where Eric jumped the content here. He knew that this was coming. Black codes are laws that were passed in the South to limit the rights of African Americans. These states had to pass 13, 14, and 15. Acknowledge the freedom, acknowledge the citizenship, give them the right to vote. But what they did to circumvent the 15th Amendment was enact a series of laws that would add requirements to voting. They could say, you've got the right to vote, but in order to do that, you got to pay a tax. It's called a poll tax. To go to vote in Macon County today, all I do is walk in and show my identity. Okay, I show my driver's license. I don't have to pay a thing because that's illegal. At this time, they in order to vote, you had to pay. So that is essentially an added tax on a people group that, of course, is poor and broke to begin with. So what it did was it allowed the wealthy to vote and not the commoners to vote. Now, to get around this for white people, they had something called grandfather clauses, and that is to say, have you heard that phrase before? That is to say, if your grandfather was allowed to vote, you are allowed to vote. So broke white people who couldn't afford a poll tax, they got around this thing by saying, my granddaddy was allowed to vote, so I'm allowed to vote without paying your tax. But the Africans who had just been freed, their granddaddies never voted. So that is how black people had to pay a poll tax. White people, wealthy or not, did not have to pay a poll tax. Another method was a literacy test. They would show a piece of paper and say, read this in order to vote. And guys, sometimes they were very complicated writings. Sometimes even the same thing, the local white people didn't have literacy. They didn't have the ability to read. So the grandfather clause is what allowed them to vote. But slaves former slaves who had been prevented an education, they had no chance to pass these literacy tests. And that is a way that these southern states got around the 15th Amendment. So Eric, pretty much what you're thinking. Anything to add? Got any thoughts going on? Black codes, another negative time in our history. African Americans are being elected to the Senate, but locally they are being prohibited from voting by these black codes. Sharecropping. So recently freed, what job are they going to have? Many former slaves went to work on the same plantation they got freed from. Their white master, former master or owner, when he pledged his loyalty back to the Union and got his land back, he needed people to work on the farm. Well, he can't have slaves anymore, of course, but the system called sharecropping is what is built. What that means is so the owner, what you doing, Bryce? Don't you go check your phone?
So,
No, it's fine. Sit. The plantation owner would hire his former slaves to come and work the land that they have always worked. They would work the land, and then he would require of them a very large percentage of the crop. So in payment for getting the land, they had to give him back almost all of the crop. They were allowed to keep some for themselves, but it was barely subsistence. Barely enough to feed their family, or if it was a cash crop, barely enough to sell and survive for the next growing season. So sharecropping was not all that different from slavery. Here's a graphic here that's probably showed a little bit better than I said. The sharecropper is provided the land and seed, and he promises the owner half of the crop. The sharecropper buys food and clothing on credit, so now he's in debt to the local merchant. The sharecropper plants and harvests the crop. Number 4, the sharecropper gives the landowner the portion that he has to give him, and he gets about half of the earnings minus the cost of anything he had to borrow throughout the year. A lot of times these sharecroppers didn't have their own tools. They didn't have their own plow, hose, rakes, all the tools necessary. So the landowner would rent them these tools at a very high rate. In the end, that sharecropper barely got subsistence. Has to enter the cycle again just to make ends meet for one more growing season. Never gets a chance to truly own his own land, truly break free from the system. So, big thing about Reconstruction and the freeing of slaves is that the southern economy lost its labor force. Well, sharecropping was kind of the fix to that, and unfortunately, it is almost just as oppressive as slavery. Now, minus beatings, whippings, and selling, the system itself was a cycle of poverty, and it never gave African Americans really a chance to escape. Let's look at some former generals and what they did during this time, and then we got to round it out with the Compromise of 1877. Robert E. Lee sets the sets the example, urging Southerners to reconcile. We know he goes on to be president of the college, where he dies in 1870. Ulysses S. Grant, he's elected to president. and he spends his presidency advocating for the rights of freed slaves. As I said, he was kind of the personification of the Freedmen's Bureau. So that's what these former generals do during Reconstruction. Let's end it. Let's end the era of Reconstruction. The election of 1876. So that is when Grant decides to not run for a third term, which he could have, but he stays in line with Washington's precedents. So we've got two new candidates running for president. One, Republican Rutherford B. Hayes. Two, Democrat Samuel Tilden. So set the stage for the election here. Here's how the vote goes. Popular vote, Hayes loses by about 200,000. Electoral vote, however, let's look at the map here. We can see county by county, it appears to be dominated by blue. Okay, and this kind of looks like the election night on Fox News, CNN, if you've ever watched that. County by county, we can see that the country is painted a little bit more blue than red. So we also know that the popular vote goes to Tilden. So tell me about the presidency of Samuel Tilden. Well, you can cut to the president's board and see that we don't have a President Tilden, so let me tell you why. Tilden wins 184 electoral votes. You need 185 to win the game. Hayes wins 165 electoral votes. 20 electoral votes are in dispute. Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina. 3 states, 20 electoral votes are in dispute. Whoever wins those states is going to win the election. Those states are located where? Former South. So these are all southern states. Republicans allege that there was election fraud in Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina. Each party is reporting that they win those votes. Basically, we don't have an agreement as to who won the election. So what we do is we strike a corrupt bargain. I like to call it part 2, because we call the election of John Quincy Adams a corrupt bargain as well. So the corrupt bargain part 2 is what happens. Since the beginning of Reconstruction, Union troops have occupied the South. So the Union troops have their strength in the South at this time, and Republicans control the election boards. So except for some deep South states where the Southerners would have controlled individual polling stations. Basically, the Republican-controlled election boards fix the election so that Hayes wins those 3 states, wins the electoral votes, and is announced as the winner of the election. Democrats know that it was fishy, but here's what happens. Hayes says that he will end Reconstruction if the Southern Democrats don't contest the election and support his presidency. A lot of times it's called to deal with the devil, which is depicted in the picture here, because Hayes wins the presidency. He's walking off with the girl there, whereas the South feels like they've won the game of Reconstruction. They don't care if they got one more Republican president to deal with. The Democrats agree to not dispute the results, and as a result, all troops are pulled out of the South, and this effectively is the end of Reconstruction. Democrats don't care that Hayes wins the election. They're going to give him the election because what they got is the compromise that officially ends Reconstruction. So in history, how long is the era of Reconstruction? It goes until troops are pulled out of the South. 1865 until the compromise of 1877, when troops are pulled out of the South. That is the action that signals the end of Reconstruction. So how long does it take to rebuild? Well, arguably the rebuilding was not complete when the troops were pulled out of the South. Kind of giving the South back to itself. There's no more Union overlord. They have re-entered the Union, and this is an age where, unfortunately, what was protections for African Americans are removed. As a result, African Americans in the South lose a lot of their protections. This is the end of the Freedmen's Bureau in the South as well. And unfortunately, a new era of oppression will begin. Your last one on your notes there, finishing off, is called the Jim Crow era. And the Jim Crow refers to segregation. I want you to do bullet point 2 and 3. Segregation of races and states continuing to find ways to deny rights to black people. Formally and informally, official legislation as well as just de facto segregation in local cities. Like that's the black side of town and that's the white side of town. That's the black school and that's the white school. So there's official segregation and then there's de facto. It's just the way it is, segregation as well. And this is called the Jim Crow era. So Reconstruction comes to an end. Freedmen's Bureau can no longer protect these hard-won protections for African Americans. The Jim Crow era is going to launch us into the next part of the story, which is going to result in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. So as you round that out there, I got one more notes slide, one more like admin slide, and then we'll pack it up. The admin slide that I'm going to pull up here in just a second, I want to make sure we all have, I think Ray's the only one still writing, VFL words. So you have your words. Okay, here's your words for the week. There will be a game day is on Friday, and you need to be here for it. What's due on Wednesday? Due on Wednesday, battles and events of the Civil War, personalities of the Civil War, Lincoln and the timeless activity. So 1, 2, 3, and then the study guide scavenger hunt that you just got. That's what's due on Wednesday. Of course, I'm not taking them from you before Wednesday. But on test day, you're going to turn them in and then sit down and get ready for the test. Oh, sorry. And I should say also the age of Reconstruction. Add that in there because we just did it. Age of Reconstruction notes. Your bonus point opportunity is already posted on Google Classroom. It's worth 5 points. Give me the effort, answer some questions, and it's worth 5 points on your exam. But you got to watch the videos to even be eligible. If you don't watch the videos, you don't get to do it. And finally, this is not on there, I'm going to hand out your VFL schedule for the whole semester so you can pre-start the smack talk at the beginning of every week as well. And I am going to work on a board outside the room. I want everybody to know we're having more fun than them. And I want you all guys to I want you to get energized about VFL every week as well. It's going to help you. You have fun talking smack. I enjoy that you know the vocab, and we all win, 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 win. Questions? Threats? Accusations? Ladies, if you want to rebuild it and play a game, you may. So.
Okay, which one's the best?
Yay, we don't have to play on the month of my birthday.
I figured you wanted.
Okay, so 1 is on the left. Right, look at that. Right, so at the end of each battle, like 4 there's a slide, draw, and white flag, surrender is the white flag. So it's the last slide.
And this one.
Hey, y'all, good morning.